The World We Create, From God to Market, by Tomas Björkman, read by Mark Meadows. We do not know exactly when, but at some point between 200,000 and 40,000 years ago, the human being progressed to a level of complexity that made it, for lack of a better term, a cultural being. Other creatures can be said to possess some form of culture, if what we mean is a degree of social organization, community-specific means of communication, or customs unique to a particular group. But Homo sapiens is the only species that has created works of art, advanced symbolic languages, and what we usually refer to as shared belief systems, narratives, rituals, and artistic expressions that characterize any human society. The unique symbolic world spaces that every human society possesses are manifestations of an emergent phenomenon exclusive to our species that can best be described as culture. It is this start of a new developmental path, coupled with a number of nascent technologies, which will lead to empires, world literature, the atomic bomb, and the internet in just a few tens of thousands of years. All this, in turn, totally changes our conceptual worlds, values, economic prerequisites, environments, and gender roles in the process. With the emergence of culture, evolution shifts into a higher gear of rapid change. We move now from the universal scale of cosmic and biological evolution to the collective scale of cultural evolution and development. Archaeological investigations reveal that the pace of technological progress quickens about 50,000 years ago, and that novel phenomena such as art start to appear. These developments are so radical that they have impelled scholars into terming it the revolution of the Upper Paleolithic, with Jared Diamond calling it our great leap forward. Archaeological evidence from this period and beyond shows a sudden burst of technological progress and a flowering of human culture, evident in hitherto unseen cave paintings and richly crafted artworks that in comparison make the earlier period appear crude and rather primitive. Something spectacular and radical happened in the Upper Paleolithic that makes it appropriate to talk about a developmental transition from one stage to another. Homo sapiens were not the only humans on Earth. Long before our migrations into Europe and Asia, these lands had already been occupied by other human species for hundreds of thousands of years. Like us, they used fire, crafted simple tools, and used spears for hunting. In itself, this highly complex behavior constitutes a developmental revolution, one that made the hominids very successful as a species and helped them colonize a large proportion of the planet. Yet it is perhaps more the degree of sophistication that makes this human trait so remarkable. Tool use is not exclusive to humans, and even though no other animals have learned how to control fire, other non-human species have demonstrated highly complex engineering skills, such as the construction of hives and river dams, that humans only surpassed after the emergence of agriculture. The ways in which our Paleolithic ancestors and hominid cousins manipulated their material surroundings is testimony to a very high level of development. But these advances do not represent as much a novelty as that of the development of culture that followed. At the time before this revolution of the Upper Paleolithic, Homo sapiens are not particularly more successful than other human species. The material conditions of our ancestors are very much the same as those of their hominid cousins. They rely on the hunting of wild game, crafting of tools, and use of bonfires to prepare their meals and keep warm. But then something astonishing starts to happen. We begin to create works of art. This truly deserves to be treated as a revolution, not only because art was an entirely new phenomenon, but also because of how suddenly artworks appear all over the world in the archaeological records from this time on. The appearance of art coincides with the rapid expansion of Homo sapiens across the globe, and during the same period, we also see an equally rapid increase in the pace of new developments in tools. These demonstrate the underlying proliferation and expansion of information networks, made manifest in the material and social practices of early humans. We only have the material archaeological remains to give us a hint about what actually happened. We know that technological development started to progress much faster compared to the period before, that human numbers expanded and that humans colonized most of the Earth, and that they replaced all other hominids and eventually settled in areas where no other species of humans had lived before, such as the Arctic regions, Australia, and finally the Americas. Why this particular sub-branch of the human family suddenly managed to do all this is something the emergence of art and the way in which it coincides with these other developments may give us an answer to. Astonishing as they are, these cave paintings are not nearly as remarkable as the new mental worlds they indicate the presence of. What is new is that a living organism, the human being, now succeeds in placing parts of its conceptual world in enduring outward depictions. We obviously do not know what went on inside our ancestors' minds, but some crucial threshold must have been reached, since they had suddenly developed the mental capabilities to create these refined works of art, and, not least, thought it important enough to dedicate the time and effort to express themselves artistically. This points to a rich inner world of imagination beginning to emerge in our ancestors, or at least only now manifesting itself in the physical world. Suddenly, a mind has arisen that not only tries to make accurate mental representations of its surroundings, but one that begins to create new mental representations of things that do not necessarily exist in the physical world, and even desires to recreate these in its surroundings. The human mind is unique in the way that it does not seem to be content with making mere mental representations of the world, but is a world in itself that even has a yearning to make representations of its own creation in the outside world. Art is a very tangible result of this inclination, a feature that is shared by all human societies. Yet, this is only a surface phenomenon. The human mind strives towards creating meaningful social realities and narratives that it can share with others, and art is merely one among many activities in which humans can do this. The human being expresses their inner conceptual world not just through objects and images, but also through dances, songs, and rituals. In this way, knowledge, concepts, and stories can more easily be shared with others and passed on to new generations. This externalized conceptual world is also more robust. It endures over time, irrespective of its creators. We might even say it takes on a life of its own beyond the biological human being and works in accordance with completely new rules. First, biological evolution created the human, then the human created culture. This is largely an undeliberate act of creation, an emergent phenomenon that arises from, but in many ways can be said to transcend, the biological regime. Fundamentally, culture is constructed through symbols and comprises everything that we humans have created. Everything from technology to language, narratives, religion, and societal systems. Culture is constituted in a more general sense by certain shared thought structures, in which symbols are created, shared, and pieced together in new ways. It is this creative process that constitutes this new cultural world, which here will be referred to as our symbol world or our collective imaginary. It is the creative and symbolic dimension of the social world, the dimension through which we human beings create our ways of living together and our ways of representing our collective life, which tie a society together, and the forms which define what, for a given society, is real. This world is an emergent world unto itself that cannot be reduced to its material or biological constituents. It is born out of human imagination, and to understand it, we must explore its foundation, human symbolic language. We do not know exactly when human language emerged. Some scholars put it as recently as 100,000 years ago, claiming it to be a unique property of Homo sapiens, while others believe it to have appeared as far back as 2 million years in our hominid ancestors. Remains of pigment processing dating back 250,000 years suggest that the capacity for symbolic thought was present from a very early age, since such substances do not have many practical applications. However, it is the time around 100,000 years ago that has been described as a linguistic Big Bang. When we look at the remains of our ancestors, it then appears clear that whether our brain's current capacity for advanced communication emerged before or after this, it is the last 100,000 years that have seen the greatest consequences of this radical transformation. It is not unlikely that it would then have taken some additional time after the biological wirings were in place to develop many of the words, symbols, and concepts that made the revolutionary developments of the Upper Paleolithic possible. A unique feature of human language is the use of symbols. In other non-human species, representations of the external world rely on the detection of similarities and correlations between objects and events. Bacteria, as a crude example, can react to all manifestations of warmth and light in one way and cold and darkness in another. That is, they can detect similarities and react in a specific way to all occurrences of that sort. More advanced beings, such as mammals, exemplified by Pavlov's dogs, can react to correlations, for example the sound of a bell, and connect it to certain events, such as the presence of food. However, both forms rely on one-to-one correspondences between internal and external events. What humans are capable of is, moreover, to react to symbols which not only refer to things in the external world, but also whole collections of similarities and correlations so as to manufacture whole inner worlds of complex realities in their minds. This kind of symbolic thinking is a very advanced capability. It requires that the mind keeps its representations in the form of similarities and correlations in the background, while other parts distill their conceptual essence into symbolic form. Shifting our attention from concrete appearances to more abstract kinds, or more specifically, going from separating indexical links between signs and objects to organizing sets of relations between signs, requires a lot of brain processing power. This explains why the threshold dividing concrete thinking from symbolic was so difficult to reach, and why it only appears to be our species, with our exceptionally large brains, that has been able to acquire such symbolic modes of representation. But size is not everything. Advanced language also requires the capacity to quickly make symbolic gestures and sounds, and the capacity to process these at an equally rapid pace in order to comprehend them. Not only did the biological brain need to evolve advanced capabilities to accommodate the rudimentary forms of symbolic communication, language itself, the symbols used in communication needed to evolve as well, in order to become more delicate and precise. This was probably a process of co-evolution involving positive feedback loops in which non-random elimination ensured that the individuals with better language processing brains would increase their chance of reproduction, while at the same time the societies with more complex and refined symbols collectively would be more successful. Whereas a biological threshold was probably reached more than 100,000 years ago, a cultural juncture, that being the development of a critical level of complex symbols, was most likely only to have been reached 50,000 years ago, evident in the sudden rapid developments associated with the revolution of the Upper Paleolithic. It has been argued that since cultural development started to accelerate without any further increase in brain size, a new cognitive factor had obviously been introduced into the equation, which then would make our capacity for continuous symbolic innovation our most prominent characteristic. From this point, the evolution of our socially and symbolically constructed collective imaginary really took off. Up until this time, biological change in the genome had been the predominant factor determining the behavior of organisms. Homo erectus manufactured and used stone tools, but the design did not change for 2 million years until they went extinct. This suggests that their capacity to use tools was largely genetically determined, and without any substantial genetic changes, their behavior would probably not have changed either. Homo sapiens, on the other hand, has not experienced any major genetic changes for the last 100,000 years, but their behavior has changed drastically. This means that they must have gained some cognitive abilities to transcend their genetic dispositions so as to go beyond these and into a mental space of mimetic mutations. It is common to think about this change in either biological or cultural terms, but most likely it was a combination of the two interacting in a positive spiral towards more complex thinking and behavior. The most widely accepted theory has to do with language, arguing that some kind of mutation changed the inner wirings of the brain so as to facilitate more complex ways of communicating and handling symbolic information. However, this ability alone does not suffice to explain the radical changes it caused. It is equally important to explain what was done with it. Harari suggests that our ability to talk about others, gossip that is what makes our complex social organization possible. To obtain reliable information about who is to be trusted, who is a freeloader, who is allied with whom, and who is sleeping together is very important when handling social relations effectively above a certain size. In larger groups, this information can be just as, or sometimes even more important than where there is food or where there is danger. It is also from gossip we see the emergence of one of the first moral systems. When we talk about someone as being lazy or dishonest, it is not only an objective assessment of that person's qualities, it is foremost an intuitive feeling of moral indignation, which then gives us the urge to tell others about that person. By doing so, we unconsciously create common perceptions of right and wrong. We tell others what is expected from them, and we attempt to arouse feelings of shame and guilt in the person we are gossiping about, so as to alter their behavior and keep them from harming the group. This is probably a hardwired evolutionary form of behavior, evident by the fact that people often get a feeling of immediate pleasure from talking about the wrongdoings of others. We do this without thinking much about it, but the result is that it helps to keep people within certain mutually agreed conventions so that they do not harm the greater good of the group. Moral indignation, or gossip, has thus been argued to be an anti-cheating technology in foraging societies, one that works even today. The ability to gossip helped Homo sapiens to organize larger and better informed groups than those of other hominids and even apes, who seldom reach numbers above 50. But gossip's organizational capacity has an upper limit of just above 150 individuals. Most people are not capable of handling more than 150 social relations, and sociological research shows that groups almost always start to face organizational difficulties above this limit. Listeners are invited to consider the disparity in quantity between their social media connections and their social circle of whom they semi-regularly keep up with. So how come we are able to organize millions or even billions of people in today's globalized society? The secret and crucial cognitive ability to explain this mystery is the second important development of the cognitive revolution: the capacity to imagine things that do not exist in the physical world. Before this time, humans were capable of communicating about physical entities such as a lion, another person, or a river. But somehow, Homo sapiens developed the ability to talk about the spirit of the lion, the soul of a diseased relative, or the river as having some kind of magical abilities. As far as we know, we are the only species that has been able to speak about things we cannot see, smell, or touch. The new emergent phenomenon was, in one word, imagination. Here it is important to keep in mind that imaginations are not the same as false ideas or lies. Even chimpanzees can lie. It has been reported that chimps have falsely warned other group members about danger, only to make the others flee into the trees so as to get the fruits on the ground themselves. No, imaginations are narratives about things beyond the physical world that nonetheless harbour some kind of meaning or message. Stories that are able to convey truth values about non-physical entities. Our ability to speak about imaginations is perhaps the most unique feature of our language compared to those of non-human animals, and probably also our deceased hominid cousins. As such, it is not only that we imagine things that are not there, but that we do so collectively. Believing in common narratives and myths, and in the power of rituals and symbols, gives us an unprecedented flexibility to collaborate efficiently in large numbers. Myths give us the ability and inclination to help others we do not even know, because we believe those strangers to be part of an extended imaginary community, an extremely powerful ability. Consider, for example, the great poetic narratives of Abrahamic religion or the American dream today. The human societies who have created the most trustworthy narratives, with rituals, symbols, and other forms of social reality, and managed to convince the largest numbers of people of their place within such collective imaginaries, have historically also been the most successful. Such collective imaginaries can have immense social value, enhancing organizational capacities. The myth of the nation can organize millions of strangers through feelings of belonging and believed mutual bonds. The same applies to narratives about a company, legal systems, and so on. But neither nation-states, companies, nor legal systems exist in the physical world. Nonetheless, they have concrete consequences and are perceived to be real by the ones who live within these imaginaries. Accordingly, it would be wrong to dismiss them as just lies, fantasies, or fake news. They make it possible for millions of individuals who are essentially strangers to cooperate peacefully and hence create organizations beyond the limit of a mere 150 individuals. Our modern world is filled with these socially constructed imaginaries: money, laws, religions, human rights, nations, and so on, and it is highly unlikely that we would have evolved to the present level of complexity and organization without them. But these modern imaginaries do not exist beyond the narratives we tell each other about such things. So, besides ascribing magical abilities to physical entities, or talking about the spirits of the dead, our species also becomes capable of talking about themselves, and of equal importance, the communities they lived in as spiritual entities. Our societies thus became something more than just a group of people. The tribe, the clan, or any other larger group of individuals grew to be perceived as spiritual entities, bound together by narratives, myths, and ideas perceived as greater than the sum of each and every individual. We become able to see our human organizations as something beyond what meets the eye, and collectively we assured each other that they were just that. Our ancestors' fictional beliefs got transported into myths, rites, songs, and dances that all constituted an important social framework or social glue, which made it possible to coordinate the social behavior of large groups of people. And that only became possible because these beings had developed a cognitive ability to imagine invisible worlds in their minds. Gossip was capable of organizing groups of 150 individuals, and still does so today, but collective imaginaries can organize far larger numbers, essentially billions, as long as we keep believing in them. These imagined invisible worlds we share with each other are sometimes also called social imaginaries. These have been defined by John Thompson as the creative and symbolic dimension of the social world, the dimension through which human beings create their ways of living together and their ways of representing their collective life. The collective imaginaries that bind our cultures together are thus intersubjective entities that manifest themselves in our shared symbol world. They are, as has been proposed by Manfred Steger and Paul James, patterned convocations of the social whole that determine the ways in which we imagine our social existence. These are deeply seated within our cultural context and provide us with pre-given understandings that we often do not reflect upon. So, even if we should not equate the collective imaginaries that shape our understandings and assumptions about our cultural context with the social constructs that make up our more concrete societal institutions, they can still be seen as a kind of subtler, implicit form of institution by the way in which they create systems of meaning to govern and shape our social structures. The theory on collective imaginaries draws considerable inspiration from Sartre's idea of the imaginary. Imaginaries are what we intend them to be, he argues. They are imaginary objects that appear to us as perceptions that we tend to treat as if they were real. But, in a physical sense, they are not real perceptions. They are not derived from external phenomena that we pick up with our senses, but are mere mental constructs that we perceive with our minds. Yet this does not mean that we are deluding ourselves to mistake fiction for facts, according to Sartre. Ultimately, we do not know that they are not real in any physical sense, that they are simply things we create in our mental space, but nevertheless, we still ascribe certain essences to these mental objects, which we then establish as truths by confirming with each other that they are very real indeed. As Cornelius Castoriadis has written, social imaginaries are the laces which tie a society together and the forms which define what for a given society is real. What is real in the cultural regime is therefore something we ourselves decide. The ability to treat these imaginaries as real, knowingly aware that they are our own creations and thus subject to change if we come up with something better, is crucial to our cultural development. We need to perceive them as real to make them work, but at the same time we need to keep in mind that they are realities that we imagine collectively, and that they can be changed so as to better address the ever-changing circumstances and challenges we are faced with. The cultural stage of evolution thus entails a higher degree of freedom than the former biological one. This higher freedom gives us the possibility to choose to act as if these fictions we create together are real. This also entails a higher degree of intentionality, one of the new rules of the game that emerges with culture. We are no longer limited to merely react to whatever nature throws at us. Culture puts us one step ahead of the game, from where we can proactively throw the ball back to nature. In this way, the imaginary worlds we create are not just made from externalities that are fused into our consciousness. Rather, as cultural beings, we create the world from our intentions and transfer them onto the external world. On this new level of complexity, humans thus refused to merely be part of a larger creation process. With our advanced mental capacities and sophisticated social devices, we stubbornly insisted on becoming co-creators of the world. The ability to create collective imaginaries, as well as form and understand abstract mental images, symbols, and concepts, opens up a whole new world of existence. In the words of Fred Speer, in contrast to the dominant mechanism for adaptation in biological evolution, in which change comes as a result of genetic variation, humans do it by changing their image of the surrounding world, called culture, and by adjusting accordingly. Perhaps most importantly, humans seek to change their environment according to this new inner world, according to their own desires and newly gained visions about how it ought to be. One of the most iconic pieces of evidence of our ancestors' newly won mental capacities is the so-called Löwenmensch or Lion Man ivory sculpture found in Germany in 1939. Not only does the figurine reveal that both lions and elephants, woolly mammoths, lived in Europe at the time, the strange half-human, half-animal motif also reveals that the artist had the cognitive ability to imagine something that did not exist in the physical world. Putting a lion head on a human body testifies to the creative and imaginative power of the artist. Once again, we do not have the slightest clue about the artwork's meaning, but something quite peculiar must have been happening in the minds of our ancestors. It reveals that humans have now embarked on a path towards increased symbol use, and that their minds and cultures have developed to an entirely new level of thought. The appearance of anthropomorphic motifs may suggest the emergence of shamanistic beliefs, that humans had begun to believe in supernatural beings, and that these artifacts played a role in some early religious shamanic practices during the Upper Paleolithic. Admittedly, we only have material remains to base our analysis on, but we have good reasons to believe that the above-mentioned artifacts are the material manifestations of a rich culture that began to develop at this time. One of the universals shared by all human communities, and something that seems to be unique to our species, is the performance of song and dance. Celebrations, rituals, song and dance, and common myths have been observed in all human communities and served as a social glue to keep larger groups together, maintain the peace, and sustain collaboration across several groups. As such, we have good reasons to believe that the same applied to our Paleolithic ancestors. In the face of the hard realities of life, people have always sought consolation and emotional expression in gatherings, rituals, art, and music. We do not know how this phenomenon came about, but it is, as with many of the other features described here, probably a result of the cognitive revolution. To rhythmically move together while vocalizing the same shared words is an effective method to strengthen social bonding, create mutual support, and resolve quarrels. It is even capable of creating a sense of community between people who are essentially strangers to each other, but do not feel that way because they know the same dances and songs. This can generate social coherence above the threshold of 150 individuals. It can also mobilize organizational capacities against a perceived other, for example, a marching song or battle cries. Song and dance are inherently connected to the invisible fictions or myths of a society, our social imaginaries, and hence one of the practical applications of our cognitive ability to imagine things that do not exist in the physical world. Through narratives, we place our inner ideas and emotions in an outer reality. They may manifest themselves in works of art, rituals, and new spoken words, but these are merely superficial aspects of the shared symbol worlds we create and recreate, worlds that only exist between us, between subjects, hence intersubjectivity. Essentially, the basic components of these worlds are narratives. Through the narratives that we tell ourselves and others, our otherwise random and chaotic symbol world is given structure and meaning. Narratives create the structure that our social world needs to survive. Through fortifying narratives with cultural expressions, the human being transfers its inner world to the outer in order to share it with others. So, in the same way that Pablo Picasso in his famous painting Guernica attempted to shape a visual representation of the horrors of war and what war means to us as humans, the creators of the Lascaux paintings, we may surmise, probably wanted to depict what the hunt meant to them. Art is a way of transcending our current language. Through various art forms, we can exceed the symbolic language's existing limitations and widen the horizons for what we can say by creating new symbols to express ourselves. In many ways, art is an important stimulus in the development of our symbol world. Hereby, language finds new ways to relate to an ever more complex reality, enabling our movement into higher levels of abstraction. So, How, then, does this creation of new symbol worlds come about? The human being is prone to create ever more new conceptions about existence and other things considered important enough to be conveyed to others. If a conception or idea gains ground, it becomes part of our common reality. Through practice and action, it becomes embodied, and the idea is strengthened by being repeated, by an increasing number of people embracing it, and in turn putting it into symbol systems where it is functionally relayed to future generations. The ideas become a natural part of society, where they are expressed in the form of rituals, stories, and belief systems. For new generations, the conceptions soon become a self-evident part of existence. What are actually only ideas and thought constructions are then perceived by later generations to be as given as natural phenomena. Symbolic language is the prerequisite for this process. Money, for example, which is only an idea, has become an integrated part of our symbol world and therefore functions as legal tender. Despite the fact that it may just be a case of ones and zeros in a distant computer system, we all experience money as something very tangible, natural, and often necessary. Even if we as individuals might understand that money is just part of our collective imaginary, we are still painfully dependent on it in our current society. Only an act of collective agency, that we all decide to change our shared belief system, can take us out of the collective grip that money or nations, states, etc. holds us in. Biological evolution created our language ability, but later it is the human being itself who, with the aid of symbolic language, creates new symbolic realities and symbol worlds. Ultimately, language and narratives do not just create our interpretations of the world, they also constitute the very foundation of our social reality. The symbol world helps us create order among our experiences and gives meaning to existence. Through such central phenomena as money, the market, nation-states, marriages, and presidents, we realize how important the symbol world and our collective imaginaries are for our human existence, as these phenomena only exist there and not in the physical world. Cities, cars, and atomic bombs would never have existed either without our symbol world. Symbol worlds are something uniquely human, and a valid reason for arguing that humanity belongs to a higher level of complexity in evolution. Our first kind of such symbol worlds was a belief system, a worldview, in my words, thought perspective, that has later been termed Animism. Humans strive to understand and see coherent patterns in an otherwise chaotic and unpredictable world. We have, according to Jeremy Lent, a patterning instinct. We constantly attempt to create meaningful narratives in order to gain a feeling of balance and control and to avoid inner chaos, but also to predict outcomes in order to help our chances of survival. In this regard, we are no different to our Paleolithic ancestors. The fierce and unforgiving forces of nature are a daily concern in the Stone Age. When natural phenomena affect us, we try to manufacture explanations. However, without any scientific knowledge of the mysterious behavior of nature, we only have our inert human intuitions to rely on. As a highly social species, we thus apply our capacity to understand the inner world and intentionality of other humans onto the natural phenomena and then ascribe them anthropoid or human-like capacities. As nature is given intentionality, the great intellectual project of our Paleolithic ancestors thus becomes an elaborated attempt to anthropomorphize and enchantificate their surroundings. The word animism is derived from the Latin anima, which roughly translates into breath, spirit, or life, and is often the name used to describe the religious or spiritual worldviews of many indigenous populations today. These are considered similar to those of our pre-agrarian ancestors. Animism is a term for different worldviews in which human as well as non-human beings are believed to possess some kind of spiritual essence or soul, and where the actions of animals are intentional, planned, and purposive. Often even inert objects and natural phenomena are believed to have intentions and wills of their own. Animist thought is characterized by the conception that there is no distinct separation between the spiritual and the physical world, that the whole world, both the subjective realms of the mind and the physical universe, are bound into webs of kinships. Often such worldviews include the idea that certain individuals, families, or entire lineages are related to particular species of animals. This kind of thinking can be described as totemic and harbours a sense of belonging and close kinship with the natural world. Sometimes kinship even extends to plant life and weather phenomena, which are also considered to have magical animistic capabilities. The supernatural world is seen as an accessible realm with beings one can interact with, almost like a separate tribal territory, and the means to access this world are believed to be various rituals and symbols. By giving gifts to the spirits, in the form of ritualized sacrifices, for instance, one can improve relations, and it has even been observed that people have believed they could marry into the spirit world. In many ways, they seem to have believed they could interact with the spirit world in similar ways to that of other people, that humans and spirits were part of the same social reality, and that the natural world had anthropoid qualities. It has been argued that animists do not see themselves as separate from their environment, and that the natural world is not something to be grasped intellectually as an object external to one's self. They identify with the world and feel that they are both within and apart from it at the same time. Among other things, this makes the hunter aware of himself and what he is doing while simultaneously taking in the viewpoint of his prey and feeling as one with it. Such a capacity may indeed have proved very effective and increased the chances of success. A spiritual or intellectual life preoccupied with the spirits of the animals and the imitation of these in animistic rituals may not have been a purely religious matter, but also a means to increase the hunter's abilities by ascribing intentionality to animals so as to better predict the behavior of wild game. By applying our well-developed human capacity of seeing the inner perspective of others, hunters can avoid scaring animals away and sometimes even lure them into traps. With the success of this kind of thinking, it is thus tempting to apply it to the rest of nature. If we can attract prey, maybe we can even attract rain, and if it is possible to make animals not attack us, maybe we can even make the rest of nature treat us in more benign ways. In our need of understanding our surroundings, we begin to see the world as full of intentions to be interpreted and influenced in the same way as other humans. If we dream about the dead or the wild animals, or simply just fantasize about them, it can appear as if we are meeting their spirit. From that, it is easy to imagine that we live in a world imbued with invisible spirits and magic. What characterizes this worldview is the lack of division between nature and mind, objectivity and subjectivity. Not only are humans seen as an integral part of nature, there is not even any clear distinction between the interior lives of the mind and the exterior physical world. Everything is equally part of the same reality, and all have an effect on our lives. Along with wild game, even the forest, the sun, the wind, and the rain are given subjective qualities. Spiritual life is preoccupied with attempts to understand and affect the intentions of all the creatures and phenomena of the natural world. This is evident in artworks and myths, where animals and natural phenomena are given central roles with wills of their own and human-like qualities, as well as in ceremonial sacrifices with the purpose of appeasing the spirits of nature. The world is enchanted by spirits, and it is as important to be on a good standing with these just as it is with other humans. When catastrophes occur, it may also be easier to live with the belief that nature is angry than to concede that it was just plain bad luck. This increases social cohesion further, and thus the chances of survival. In a state of not knowing the difference between the subjective and objective worlds, phenomena in the inner world can seem as tangible as phenomena in the external. The dream of a dangerous beast can invoke the same amount of fear as an encounter with one in the physical world, and to explain the meaning and intentions of such mental encounters would then seem just as important as dealing with the physical ones. It is thus with great effort that humans struggle to interpret such dreams and visions, often considered important messages from the spirits, and through rituals, dances, and states of ecstatic trance, attempt to strengthen the relation to this invisible world. The shamans, or wise old people, are seen as mediators between the worlds, who are considered to have particularly good relations to the spirits, and thus become authorities in society. This is a social structure that will become the basis for later social hierarchies, with priests on top, and a division of labor where some are given intellectual tasks. The initial perception of natural phenomena as the embodiment of various spirits will later develop into more elaborated belief systems with various gods. Often it is the trustworthy spirit of the sun that becomes the basis of later sun gods, supreme gods in pantheons of hierarchically ordered gods that even later evolve into the more abstract perceptions of God or supreme divine principles that we know from later organized religions. But these ideas have their beginning in the animistic perceptions of the world, perceptions to be derived from deep within the human psyche that are probably the result of projections of our subconscious mind made conscious through dreams, visions, and states of trance. Among animists, everything is interpreted in terms of an invisible inner world, a world of magic. Yet magic is in this context not to be understood as nonsense and make-believe, but as a first explanatory model for cause and effect. Understanding that things have a cause is a very important intellectual breakthrough for humankind, and to conclude that something happens because of magic is, after all, better than no explanation at all. If there is a cause, maybe we can change things in our favor. The animist thought perspective is easy to acquire through emotions and imagination, and seems to be embedded deep within the human psyche. It is a way of thinking that is derived from our hard-wired social cognitive capacities, and therefore something that does not need a long theoretical education to be learned. According to the famous psychologist Jean Piaget, this animistic enchantification of the exterior world is an early stage of thinking that is also evident in the cognitive development of children. All children seem to go through this phase, and it is not a coincidence that we initially attempt to anthropomorphize the physical world, since human relations account for some of our first and most important experiences with it. Animism is our earliest thought perspective, a pre-rational form of thinking that entails the entirety of existence becoming permeated by this invisible world's consciousness and magic. Animism initially constitutes the human being's total base of interpretation within which reality could be understood and managed. It is here we find some of the first traces of human culture and see the first major developments of a spiritual life beyond the mundane. The invisible spirit world is the first comprehensive intellectual system the human being develops in order to orient itself in existence. There is no division between phenomena such as culture, religion, and politics. These are differentiations that are only crystallized later. Everything is interpreted within a completely different frame of reference, which we today would regard as a fantasy world, where the border between the inner and outer, fantasy and perception, possible and impossible, is very fluid. However, as modern humans, we should under no circumstances disparage our Stone Age ancestors' attempt to attain understanding of the world. They reflected upon their mental worlds of dreams, fantasies, and fears, and they were thinking about the outer world with plants, animals, and the overpowering forces of nature. They understood that both the inner and the outer world influence us, and just like everyone else, they had a need to piece together an understanding of their total existence's cohesive whole. Through animism, humanity created a culture and conceptual world that provides a model of how the world might be interconnected, as well as furnishing methods to influence existence. The growing conceptual world and the ideas we have built around it are thus the foundation for our continued cultural evolution. With animism, magic truly conquered the world, and the souls of those who obtained its strange secrets. This mode of thought was in fact so effective that it outcompeted all other human lifeways to an extent that no pre-animistic societies have survived into the modern era, or even very long into the Upper Paleolithic for that matter. The gains of having a rich artistic tradition, delicate spiritual practices, and sophisticated narratives about the world gave the societies who embraced this kind of thinking some crucial social capacities that, as a matter of Darwinian logic, increased the odds of survival to a degree that within a few thousand years, all human societies had either moved on to the animist thought perspective or died out from the competition of more successful animistic ones. The reasons for the radical changes brought upon the planet by humans should not be looked for in the human body alone, but in the way in which humans organize themselves. Somehow, some kind of threshold was crossed when humans, after slowly evolving over millions of years, suddenly transformed the face of the Earth in the matter of, in evolutionary terms, an almost insignificant number of generations. It has been argued that it probably has something to do with our particularly well-developed capacity to learn, one of the defining traits of our species. Even though other species, especially mammals, also have the capacity to teach their offspring certain things, in most other species, experience is lost when an individual dies. Because non-human animals do not have any symbolic means to transfer knowledge across generations, information thereby fails to accumulate over time. What made humans breach this developmental threshold is the capacity for language and symbolic thought. Human language, David Christian has argued, allows more precise and efficient transmission of knowledge from brain to brain. That means that humans can share information with great precision, creating a common pool of ecological and technical knowledge, which in turn means that for humans, the benefits of cooperation increasingly tend to outweigh the benefits of competition. Humans contribute knowledge to a common pool that survives the death of the individual, which can be accessed by others, and thus accumulate knowledge and skills non-genetically from generation to generation. A distinctive feature of humans is hence their ability to learn collectively. Christian accordingly believes this is why it is crucial to understand humans not by comparing individual humans with individual chimpanzees, but by comparing groups of humans with other groups in the animal kingdom. We need to investigate the collective brains that millions of humans have developed over many generations, he argues. After all, very few of the countless human-made artifacts we surround ourselves with and the methods of social organization that we live and work with could have been invented by a single individual during their very short lifespan. Our complexity can therefore not alone be explained by the fact that we as individuals are a little more intelligent than chimps and the other hominids that we outcompeted. Indeed, given the larger brains of the Neanderthals, we cannot with certainty establish that we, in fact, are the species with the greatest amount of raw brain power to have walked the earth. Our success has more to do with what we did with our intelligence, most notably socially. That we ended up as vastly more creative than the Neanderthals is therefore, as pointed out by Christian, because of the way in which we managed to share knowledge within and between generations. So, with the emergence of the culture-creating human, we thus have a new object of investigation, something that completely changed the further trajectory of evolution, namely the mental artifacts transferred from one human mind to another. With the emergence of culture and our collective imaginary, things start to change at a much faster pace compared to the previous developments in Earth's history. But how can we explain this increased speed? The development of the physical universe progressed very slowly. When life arose, the biological evolutionary processes unfolded much more rapidly than the physical ones before. With the genesis and development of the human being's symbol world, the speed of development increases further. Critical changes in complex biological organisms often take thousands of generations, over hundreds of thousands or millions of years to come about. Substantial cultural changes in our symbol world can, on the other hand, occur over 1 or 2 generations. A simple way of understanding how our symbol world allows for such fast-paced development is through the concept of memes, originating from Richard Dawkins' book, The Selfish Gene, 1976. Dawkins argues that cultural and technological evolution is driven by memes, which he considers the smallest components of our symbol world. He sees them as mental equivalents to the genes of the biological world, though non-material, symbolic entities that only exist in our minds. Just like a gene, a meme is to be understood as a self-replicating unit of transmission, but instead of replicating through the gene pool, memes propagate through our minds. They are units of cultural information, the knowledge and skills humans non-genetically pass from individual to individual across generations, such as signs, ideas, thought systems, etc. On a smaller scale, a meme can be a word, a song, or a tool, and on a larger scale, an entire language, a religion, or a scientific discipline. Whenever a song, a word, or an idea originating from someone else has been transferred by injecting its mimetic DNA from one individual to another, the meme can be said to have been successfully reproduced. In this regard, memes appear to behave much more like viruses than genes. Memes can be very contagious. Just think about that song on the radio you cannot get out of your head. When that happens, the meme can be said to have injected its DNA into your brain, and hence managed to use you as a vessel for its reproductive ends, and thereafter you might even infect someone else by whistling the song in their proximity. This viral dynamic occurs much faster than any proliferation through a gene pool, which explains the fast-paced development of culture contrary to the slow evolution of biological bodies. Because memes are not transmitted through biochemical processes but through signs and language, they can escape the biophysical constraints of genetics. The meme is therefore not dependent on slow, random mutations and natural selection in the form of annihilation of biological individuals, but can spread much faster from one living person to another. Memes are, however, like genes, still subject to evolutionary pressures. Only the memes that consistently manage to spread to large numbers of people over time will survive in the end, and in order to do so, they need some competitive edge in relation to the environment and to other memes. It can be a type of tool that proves exceptionally useful for survival, or it can be a certain type of behavior, a thought or an attitude that gives its host society an advantage in relation to nature or other societies. If the meme is not competitive, it either dies when superior memes are adopted, or it dies with its host when its competitive disadvantages cause the culture that has embraced it to be destroyed by others with superior memes. Even the song that is stuck in your brain is subject to these evolutionary pressures. In order to consistently inject its mimetic DNA into our brains, it needs to provoke stronger emotional rewards than some other song currently on the radio. And with time, it is gradually outcompeted by new and superior songs that more sufficiently resonate with our emotions. This does not mean, however, that only the fittest memes will spread at any given moment. Rather, over time, it is more probable that memes better adapted to the current situation will prove victorious and survive to reproduce another day. Religions and ideologies can survive for a long time, even in the face of mimetically superior ones, But with time they are likely to succumb to symbol systems that address the current problems of the age more adequately. Societies and cultures that do not adopt new, superior memes often vanish. Individuals and societies who succeed in the transmission to better adapted memes can avoid the negative consequences of having obsolete memes and thus eventually outcompete those who have not. Memes, like genes, also do not always copy perfectly, but may change over time, or mutate, in other words. They can even merge with other memes and consequently create entirely new meme structures. But memes do not act as randomly as their biological equivalents either. New memes do not emerge as random mutations from which only a few give its host an advantage, but rather emerge in the minds of human beings as a conscious response to their environment. This further explains why the speed of cultural development is so much faster than biological evolution. Humans do not need to wait for nature to randomly come up with an advantageous meme. As active agents, we can develop them ourselves as answers to certain problems. With culture, we do not need to wait for advantageous genetic mutations to appear in a lucky host and wait for everybody else to go non-randomly extinct. With culture, we can simply change our behavior by selecting a more fitting course of action. The rapid developments during the last few thousands of years have not been caused by biological evolution, but by an evolution of our symbol world. Ever since memes appeared, they have been the primary cause of change on Earth due to the sheer speed through which they can transfer information and the immense power they wield in relation to the physical world. In the same way DNA replaced RNA because of the former's greater informational capacities, memes replaced DNA as evolution's leading force because of their even greater capacity to transfer knowledge and experiences across generations. With the emergence of memes, the primary carriers of evolutionary information were no longer body-bound, but non-physical entities to be found within the impalpable and volatile world of symbols. This, however, did not mean that the effects on the physical world would be any less tangible. On the contrary, the higher flexibility and propensity to change that prevails within the realm of symbols caused changes so dramatic and at an unprecedented speed that within a few thousand years, a mere blink of an eye in biological evolution, the surface of the Earth would be altered beyond recognition. With the new player in town, symbolic language, human beings venture onto a dangerous and beautiful path as evolutionary co-creators to change the world in accordance with the imaginary constructs of their collective minds.